What's up, everybody? Welcome back into the episode of The Lawyer You Know. And we have a verdict in the Diddy trial. It's a split verdict. It can be a little bit confusing to understand how the jury got here. I've got some ideas. Who is this really a win for? What type of prison time, if any, is P. Diddy looking at? Will he get out on bail before sentencing to go home and wait to see if he even ends up back in prison? So many questions. We're going to talk through as many of them as we can today. I'm bringing my dad on to talk about it as well. So get your questions in and let's get to it. All right, Dad, the first thing I'm going to do here for us to just kind of announce what the verdict is, this visual is helpful to kind of simplify it for everybody because there were 5 counts that P. Diddy was charged with. Certain counts were significantly more severe and detrimental if he would have been convicted of these counts than others. And I'm going to run through them. And then we'll talk about what the differences are, why he's convicted of some and not others, what the defense did well, what they didn't, what the prosecution did well, what they didn't, all coming from a trial that was not live streamed. The only information I got was from reports inside the courtroom, whether it's on Twitter or people's videos. So not nearly as in-depth analysis or trial watching as we usually do. So we need to make sure that that caveat is made with everything we say about this case. And we're not going to get into the details and facts like we would on a normal case that we're able to watch every single witness, every single word said by the lawyer. So I think that's important, number one. But count 1 was the RICO charge, the racketeering conspiracy charge for Diddy. That was not guilty, as you can see on the screen. Count 2 was trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion. That was count 2. That was not guilty. Count 4 was the other trafficking charge, also not guilty. So 3 of the 5 charges were not guilty. Count 3 was the transportation to engage in prostitution, aka the Mann Act. Counts 3 and 5 were those 2 counts, and he is guilty on those 2 counts, 3 and 5, dealing with the transportation, the Mann Act, transportation across state lines for the purpose of prostitution. So those were the least or lesser charges of the 5 that Diddy could have possibly been convicted of. But there were a lot of similar elements, right? Similar victims with counts 2 and 3, and then a similar victim with counts 4 and 5. So it's not like one victim won all of their counts, being Cassie Ventura on, I believe, counts 2 and 3, Jane Doe on counts 4 and 5. Combination of all of them for the RICO, like we had with R. Kelly, somewhat similar allegations. A lot of people have those questions. R. Kelly was dealing with minors and had some different details than Diddy, but obviously also 2 different sets of lawyers, 2 different jurors, which is the most important thing. And the also interesting part about all this is we heard the jury could not agree on count 1, almost came back hung, or did try to come back hung. The judge sent them back, but they had come to unanimous verdicts between counts 2, 3, 4, and 5. So people started to think, are those all guilty? Are those all not guilty? Well, it turns out they were already split before they even came to the decision finally on count 1. That's kind of the big overview of how we got here. Why don't you tell us your overarching thoughts before we get into the details of what this means specifically, what the jail time could be, things like that?
Well, if you look at this and you really analyze it, there is some logic.
Hold on a second. Hold on. Sorry. You seem a little loud on my end. So you don't have, just try to, I know I yell all the time too. So just try not to yell as you answer.
Okay. If you look at this and you analyze this, there is some logic to the verdicts. The racketeering conspiracy, part of the, you have to have predicate acts. In other words, there have to be crimes committed by the conspirators to have racketeering. It's not a crime in itself, but it's related to the commission of other crimes by the racketeering enterprise. Some of those were the trafficking charges. So if you found them, not guilty on the trafficking charges, that makes it tougher to find them guilty on the RICO conspiracy charge. So that's one thing if you just look at the verdicts on their own. And the Mann Act charges don't really require them to make any allegations or to use the testimony of the 2 victims to convict. because on those two Mann Act charges, all they had to prove was the interstate transportation for those acts. And the interstate transportation, in this case, they proved it like crazy because they had the mail,
Escort. Yeah.
the mail servicers
Yeah.
that they had. And they had a ton of travel records that they put in. In fact, they had so many records of the travels that they had to have a summary witness testify as to what all the records meant. So they were able to prove the Mann Acts without the two victims, Jane and Cassie, I believe is right. So whether they did or didn't believe Jane and Cassie beyond a reasonable doubt didn't matter to the Mann Act charges. So there is some logic to how they found these verdicts.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily know, based on the defense's theory and theme and really what they did, I don't know that they didn't believe Cassie, especially. A lot of the reports about Jane Doe were not positive when she was testifying, but all the reports on Cassie was that she was very believable, a very credible witness, a very sympathetic witness, very early on in the case for the prosecution. I don't necessarily know that this verdict means they don't believe the victims, because some of the defense's theme was this was domestic violence. This was immoral. This was a toxic relationship. This is not how you should treat people that you love, but it doesn't rise to the level of trafficking. It doesn't rise to the level of RICO. And I do think it's possible. We'll see if any of these jurors give interviews, and I think they, shed a lot of light on this, but I think they still could have believed the victims, but not believed that the actions rose to the level of a crime, which, if that is the case, kudos, hat tip, what a job by the defense team, right?
Well, I disagree with you.
Okay.
I think if they did believe Cassie and Jane, they would have found him guilty of the trafficking.
Okay.
There's no doubt that their testimony established the elements of trafficking. I'm not saying they didn't believe them. I'm not saying they didn't think that the activity happened as they say it happened. But I think the real point was, number one, was it consensual? Number two, was it anything, and I hate to say, I don't want to minimize domestic violence, but is it anything other than domestic violence in a relationship that was built on love? I mean, Cassie, they were together for, I think it was 11 years. And they also had a bunch of text messages with Cassie and with Jane where, hey, I want to come. I want to see you. I want to participate in the freak offs. I mean, there are actually text messages that say that. So I think the real evidence was, did they believe them that it was trafficking versus domestic violence, or just a strange relationship that they had?
Yeah, I guess I can get behind that, where that maybe they didn't believe the intent or emotion or thoughts at the time as Cassie was explaining it, right? Was it consensual? Was it something that she wanted to do at the time, but now saying that she didn't, versus believing the actual acts took place, what they meant, things like that. So I guess there's some nuance there to what they did believe or what they thought was actually happening at the time. I feel like everything I ever saw or heard from Cassie explaining it, I believed it. It seemed like there was going to be enough evidence there to convict, and at the end of the day, there wasn't. These are the kinds of trials I really, really, really wish we could watch with our own eyes and hear with our own ears to see, was this a totally illogical verdict? Was this crazy? Like, how is it possible a jury could have come to this verdict? Or was the presentation of evidence just not clean or clear enough from the prosecutors? Did they not explain RICO and trafficking and the elements, simplify them enough to where the jury says, oh, even though this might not be the normal RICO or what you might think of a racketeering conspiracy, and, it's not the mob or the mafia, like they did a pretty good job in R. Kelly's case, with the different theories and the people involved and what they would do and how they all had this same criminal purpose for the activity that they had. Did they not do as good of a job of setting that up in this case? Where do you think the prosecutors fell short? I mean, again, in the information that we have, what do you think some of the issues were with getting convictions on the top charges?
Well, there's a lot to say about that. One thing I want to say about our last comment, let's also not forget that Cassie got $20 million in the civil settlement, which certainly would go to the fact of why she wanted to say these things about him, because she collected $20 million.
Well, but wouldn't that also say that if somebody's going to pay $20 million, usually they don't pay $20 million unless they do something wrong? And the jury heard that. And it's like, I
Well,
mean, I think that can cut either way.
right. And he also paid $100,000 to the security guard at
Right.
the hotel. I mean, money means nothing, I think, in his level of finance. But going back to the RICO charge, I think it was a real stretch. A couple of things that you have to think about why it was RICO designed. And most people look at RICO as the mafia or as some kind of organized crime organization. And here we have an organization there, I think it was Big Boy? I think that was the name.
Bad Boys.
Bad Boy Enterprises, yeah. You've got Bad Boy Enterprises. That's a one-man operation. That's P. Diddy. So this is a racketeering enterprise that's comprised of one person, basically. So you don't have a large organization with multiple leaders and lieutenants and those kind of things. They really laid out. Nobody testified in this trial. No co-conspirator testified during the course of the trial to say that, hey, yeah, we agreed to do this stuff and we agreed to do this and we agreed to that. You didn't have any testimony like that. When a racketeering case is brought, sometimes prosecutors get very inventive at racketeering because the punishments are so high. And it's easy to bring in a lot of extrinsic evidence into a racketeering trial that you couldn't normally bring in because you're allowed to paint the entire picture of the entire organization. The Department of Justice has a racketeering division that had to approve this prosecution. So they had to go to the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. and get this approved. So they got it approved, but I think it was a real stretch because this wasn't what RICO was designed for. And it was designed for when Rudy Giuliani prosecuted the mafia and the families. That's what it was designed for. So this was a stretch. I've had these situations. I did a RICO trial a while back. And what it was RICO and tax offenses. And I told the prosecutor, I said, look, we'll plead to the tax offenses, but we're not going to plead to RICO. So we went to trial because the prosecutors wouldn't drop the RICO. The jury found him not guilty on the RICO, but guilty on the tax offenses because it just was hard to prove this one guy who cheated on taxes was also a racketeering enterprise. So it happens all the time. The prosecutors stretch it, and I think this was a stretch.
Yeah, and I almost interrupted you in the beginning, but I didn't, to say we feel like that in a lot of cases. Like a lot of cases where RICO is charged like this, we'll sit there and say they overcharge it. This isn't RICO. They're doing it because RICO has a pile-on effect. It allows you to get so much inadmissible evidence in if it's just the tax crimes versus if they're trying you for RICO, or if it's just the Mann Act in P. Diddy's case, they were able to put so much more on to try to get him convicted of RICO and the generally bad guy rule. You pile up enough horrible, despicable, ugly, toxic acts, and maybe you'll get a jury to just say guilty across the board.
Right.
And that's where, what were you saying?
No, I was going to say, in this case, let's not forget, the RICO, there were 32 acts in the RICO count that they looked at: kidnapping, obstruction of justice. Those are things unrelated to the Mann Act or the trafficking, but they were able to throw those into the RICO so they could present those to the jury. Just exactly what you were saying.
Yeah, and that's really, from my perspective, a good defense attorney makes a jury understand the difference. They make a jury understand the definitions. And I mean, I don't know this to be a fact, but my guess is similar to your tax case. If they would have offered Diddy a plea deal to plead guilty to these two crimes or charges that he was found guilty of, maybe he would have pled guilty to them. And there's reasons why, and we'll talk about it. There was so much evidence of that. The RICO, to me, I can understand how the jury got to a not guilty verdict. The trafficking is the more interesting situation, right? Because the evidence of the trafficking and the difference between trafficking and the Mann Act, sometimes people say, it's the commercial nature maybe of trafficking, or just the Mann Act or prostitution could just be more personal. What are some of the differences when you compare those two charges, and how is it possible that a jury can be not guilty on the trafficking, but guilty on the Mann Act?
Well, trafficking, number one, does not require transportation. The Mann Act does require transportation. Trafficking is a commercial enterprise. Mann Act doesn't have to be a commercial enterprise. So when people logically think about trafficking, trafficking is what they think about. The Mann Act is strictly taking somebody across state lines to prostitution's illegal. To take him across state lines for something like that. So there's a big difference in the severity as well. Under trafficking, you have a minimum mandatory of 15.
Well, yeah, we're going to get to the, so hold on, before we get to the potential punishment, just off the facts and how jurors look at it, the difference is, yeah, and I think you pointed out most of the differences between trafficking and the Mann Act, so people can understand, because a lot of people don't understand, how is that even possible that he would get, that they would be not guilty on one, but guilty on the other. And I think we kind of hit that. I'm going to hit some of these questions before we get to potential sentences, what that looks like, bail, should he get it? Do you think his fame and status played into their decision? What do you think?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I mean, if they were mesmerized by his fame, they wouldn't have found him guilty of the two Mann Act violations. So I don't think so. I think that they again, I believe in the jury system. So I think that they did their job. They went through each count and decided whether it was proven beyond a reasonable doubt, and that's what they did.
Yeah, I don't know. I believe in our jury system as well. I still think it's possible that his fame could have had some sort of part on some of the decisions, or at least some of the conversations back there. But it does seem like you said this is a consistent verdict legally that is logical and understandable if you really dig in as to what they think the actual criminal activity was in this case. And it was not a domestic violence charge. I think they may have convicted on something like that. But I do think they tried to parse out what facts were proven, what were not, and which of those facts actually constituted one of the crimes charged. Not a crime, but one of the crimes charged.
There's also a kind of a deeper, I think, kind of a thought on this, and that is proving a lifestyle. I think that was very important in this trial. And then the jury, I think, accepted the fact that people in P. Diddy's position have a lifestyle different than you and me, and how they live their lives, and how they party, and what they do at their parties. And there's a cultural item that prosecutors, I think, didn't understand when they tried this case, is that maybe in his world, and I think the jury's bought this, in P. Diddy's world, these freak-offs and these things that they did, I mean, I think Cassie testified that she can't remember, but it was hundreds of freak-offs in the 11 years. So think about, hundreds of freak-offs. Is that not a lifestyle? Is that not the way these people that live a life different than you and I can imagine? But the jury found that, and I think they accepted the fact that this is just the way those people live.
I definitely think there's an element of their lives are different than ours, which we've talked about. R. Kelly, Johnny Depp case as well. Some of the stuff there, not quite to this level, obviously, but it's just celebrities live in a different world, in a different life than us. Doesn't make it right, but certain things are illegal, other things are not. And that's what's important for the jury to parse out, and for law enforcement and for prosecutors to parse out. Mr. Tragos and Peter, was the verdict a surprise to you? It was for me. Thanks for all the coverage lately.
Well, if you're asking me that, yeah, I really thought that. Now, the RICO was a stretch for me at the beginning, but I thought the trafficking, I really thought that they made the case for trafficking.
So I'm going to pull up a text message from my buddy Jason, who said, "Are you going live for the Diddy verdict?" I said, "It's not streamed, so I'm not going to be live, but we'll be talking about it." He said, "Prediction." I said, "At least some guilty. If the feds blew this, they should be embarrassed. But it is Diddy, so I wouldn't be shocked if there was more not guilty than guilty." So I'm always surprised in a federal criminal case when there's not a conviction, and everybody should be, because they usually only win 90+% of the time. But with how this case was tracking, it did start to feel like these defense lawyers, the feeling in the courtroom was these defense lawyers were going to win on something. It turns out they won on most of the things. And would you agree with that? So I'll ask this question here before we get to more of the viewers' questions, but overarching, who is this a win for and who is this a loss for, with 3 not guilties and 2 guilties on these specific charges? I'll put it back on the screen while you discuss, just so people can have the visual.
There's no doubt this is a defense win. I mean, it's a defense win, hands down. I mean, it's no doubt in my mind that they can be proud of this verdict. They made some tough decisions, because remember, they put on no defense. And so they rested right after the prosecution finished their case. So I think this is a definite win for them, and their strategy paid off.
Yeah, that's usually an indication, right? If they don't have a case at all, either they have nothing, which in this case, I definitely don't think they had nothing. I think there were some people willing to come and say whatever P. Diddy probably wanted them to say, right? I think they had something, but I think they were so confident. That's why they didn't call anybody. And that's usually an indication when that happens. It doesn't always work though, right? Though you've talked about how you've waived closing argument in cases. I've talked about it. You don't always win, right? Some have been wins, some have been losses, and it's always a risk, but you go into it feeling comfortable with the risk and the decision you're going to make. Curious what the difference is between trafficking and transportation to engage prostitution. Yeah, we talked about that. We hit this one. Denise, you have a very common question. This was the most common question I was getting since the verdict came in, so I'm glad we were able to hit it. Number one bailiff was not able to be impartial. His overall behavior was just too despicable. Less than 20 doesn't do it for me. We're going to get to the potential sentence here in a minute. Nick, theory. RICO is primarily used for extra exceptions in the hearsay rules to get testimony in that would have been ruled out otherwise. If they prove the RICO, great. If not, still got testimony in. And this is true not just with the hearsay testimony, but with so much evidence like we talked about. And it almost feels better talking about your tax case you brought up than this one, because there was so much evidence alone on the Mann Act that they probably could have gotten a conviction there without piling on the RICO stuff. But with your tax case, there are situations probably where it was more likely your guy was going to get convicted on the tax stuff, or more likely P. Diddy was going to get convicted on the Mann Act because they had the other evidence to pile on as well, even if they lost the RICO charges. But it's not usually like federal prosecutors, and you can speak to this more than I can, but it's not really normal for them to overcharge like this, hoping they get a conviction on a lesser included. Maybe it is a backstop, but that's not normal course of business for the feds. They just won't charge things they don't think they're going to win, right?
Oh, absolutely. Again, the volume in a state prosecutor may have a caseload of 300 cases. A federal prosecutor has a caseload of, if he has a lot, he's got 20 or 30. So far more selective. You have far more ability to take the time and really make your decisions that you think you're going to win a trial if you go forward.
Laureen said, with this and Karen Reed, it feels more and more like the only way to beat charges is with tons of money, regardless of guilt or innocence. Surely we can do better. So if you can explain to me how we can do better, let me know. I am all ears and trying to figure out ways to make the system more fair. I think we do it on the prosecutorial side and the law enforcement side, not the criminal defense lawyer side. It's like, how do we make products better? It's like cheaper or better. It's hard to make the product cheaper and better. So it is a difficult question, but this isn't something this isn't something new, Lauren. I think I may have said Laureen. Sorry, Lauren. This isn't something new. This isn't something different. This is true. I agree with you. I wish it was different. I wish there was something we can do, but how do we create a situation where the people that are the best at their job don't make the most money? That's kind of the interesting and difficult part for it, but it does feel, I have the same feeling you do, and I'm involved in that, right? But the best criminal defense lawyers can't go around representing everybody for free. And even if they did, you still need experts. It still costs money to fight the state. And it also comes with how much money the state spends to prosecute these people. That's what people don't talk about. That's what people don't know, is the unlimited resources the prosecutors and law enforcement have to prosecute these people. And the only way to come close, it's not an even playing field. You don't come up there even-handed with the state, not even P. Diddy, not Karen Reed, not anybody, because their resources are unlimited and they literally play by different rules. Law enforcement and prosecutors can do things that the richest, highest paid criminal defense attorneys and criminal defendants can't do. Do you have any thoughts on that question?
No, it's sad but true.
Right.
Her analysis is absolutely right. That is true. That
absolutely
that money is an advantage when you're doing a criminal defense case.
Absolutely. The same justice system that found Karen Reed not guilty found Diddy not guilty can't be happy about one and not the other. Yeah, I mean, I think that's how you look at it, and that's what it comes down to. I think it's a good perspective, and I talked about this before the Diddy trial ever started. I thought there was going to be more evidence. I didn't think they would go to trial with this, right? The Fed. So I'm a little bit surprised at that, based on the reports, of course, because I didn't watch it. But I said the same people that are champions for Karen Reed And the fact that, she's not guilty, like they said, through our justice system, they had to presume P. Diddy innocent, because that presumption of innocence is a very important part of our judicial system.
And I don't know if I think I'm right on this. The jury deliberated a lot shorter on P. Diddy than they did on Karen Reed.
Mm-hmm.
I think it took them a lot longer to come up with a verdict. This actually, I actually look at this as a pretty quick verdict, considering the charges and considering the number of charges and the complexity of a racketeering case. They came back pretty quick with a verdict.
Somebody said, you can't compare Karen Reed to Diddy. Absolutely you can. And that's the whole point of our system, is the system has to work for the worst of us in order for it to work for the best of us. Every person sitting in a criminal defendant's chair when they show up to trial is presumed innocent. Just because the cops say you did it, law enforcement say you did it, just because you got arrested, just because you're sitting in that chair does not mean you're guilty. That applies to Karen Reed, to P. Diddy, to Joe Schmo that we don't even know that has an active criminal case right now. The rules apply the same to Karen Reed and to Diddy. I'm not comparing them as people. I'm not comparing them as what they do. I'm not comparing them as even the allegations made between them. Not at all similar. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying that, Karen Reed is the same type of personality as PD. None of that. None of that. I'm purely just talking about how they walk into our legal system and how a jury should view them at the beginning of the trial. And that's the hard thing that people to reconcile, but that's what people would beg for in the Karen Reed trial. That's why we as lawyers beg for it in every single case. Every single case. Got to ask Papa T, is the blank cardboard cutout the unknown client behind you?
No, it's a known client. That's a demonstrative exhibit we used in trial. A bunch of lawyers, and we had a bunch of defendants. Each one of us had a cutout of our defendant, and we would move them around the courtroom to demonstrate how the case was, how they moved during the course of the crime. And that was just a mock of my client, and I kept it.
Yeah, and it was used in closing, right?
Yes, and during the course of the trial too, to demonstrate the people were
that trial was forever ago. Was that 30 years ago?
No, it wasn't quite that long ago.
I was a child. I was not even like in high school when that happened.
Quite a while ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was an attempted murder case.
I hear you, and I just don't think it will ever be perfect, which is why I use the word better. No, I agree with you. The system does not work for the worst of us when money can buy you out of jail. I mean, there are definitely limits. Okay. How was he not charged with R and any type of SA, drugging, beating women, not consensual, IUD placement, etc.? So again, you can speak to that if you want. A lot of that has to do with RICO statute of limitations issues, proving each individual one, but you can go ahead and add to that.
Well, they could have done that. They could have charged it in the RICO case if they wanted to, I guess. But there really isn't a commensurate federal charge that is an R.
That would be state. Yeah, you would handle that.
That would be a state charge normally. So they could have included it in the RICO, but it would have definitely not been a separate charge.
The more I think about this with this verdict, and again, not knowing how the details came out, it really sounds like a bunch of disgusting, deplorable, crazy freak off parties with escorts and paid service people was all they had. That it just wasn't strong enough on any drugs, guns, domestic stuff, some kind of connected activity to where people were working together to make sure this was happening. It's just really, it's really surprising to me. I thought they were going to have just so much more from the stuff you hear in the news about, P. Diddy and other celebrities, and just, a good job by his lawyers to really highlight that stuff.
They had, from what I understand, 30 to 50 videos, and I think they only played 2.
It's wild.
Yeah, they only played 2 of the videos. Obviously, they picked the 2, I'm sure, freakiest ones. But they played only 2 of the videos. And again, I'll bet the videos didn't show anything other than maybe a disgusting lifestyle, but they probably did not show any force or violence, except for the one on the hotel. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just very, I don't know. this is one now with this verdict. I wish I could have watched it even more. I wanted to watch it initially. I like watching good lawyering, and there's a lot of lawyers with a lot of famous last names, right? Not all of them maybe the last name you'd expect to see, but a lot of famous last names in that courtroom. I really wish I could have watched. Okay, so now let's get into this. Doro Della said, question, how likely is it that he'll get bail? Correct, no more than 25 years over him. So my understanding is the 2-Mann Act charges carry with them a sentence of up to 10 years each, meaning a maximum of 20 years as a penalty for what he was convicted of. Is that your understanding as well?
It's my understanding, but I'm absolutely positive they're going to run concurrent at the worst. That they won't be stacked by the judge 10 on top of 10, but the 2 10s will run at the same time. So I don't think it's going to be anything other than a concurrent sentence, whatever it is.
And that's the interesting part also. What was his attorney lineup? So I'm hesitant to say there was a lot of attorneys involved, but I believe Garagos was involved. I think Garagos' daughter, Agnifilo, who's also representing Luigi Mangione, the wife of Agnifilo and his whole firm representing Luigi Mangione. Brian Steele was involved. Comey was one of the prosecutors, right? It was just a very, very interesting lineup I would have liked to watch. But yeah, so if they're going to run concurrent, and you think they're going to run concurrent, and just so people know, the difference between concurrent and consecutive is if you have 2 concurrent 10-year sentences, you only serve 10 years. If it's 2 consecutive, you serve 10 plus 10, so that's 20 years. Big difference. So if they're running concurrent, that max drops from 20 years down to 10 years as a max. Do you think P. Diddy is looking at the max sentence here?
No.
No way.
I don't think so.
It just really is not going to be. I mean, I'd be shocked if it was.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think he's going to get. Now, there's a thing called the sentencing guidelines, and I can't tell you the exact number because we don't know the number, because the probation office puts on these guidelines, and you can be aggravated for being a leader. We know he was probably a leader, so he may get points for that. You can aggravate how many victims, he may get points for that. And you can even use acquitted conduct to aggravate your sentence. So I don't know where it's going to come out, but it'll be less than the 10 years.
Yeah, I agree. And he's already got, 10 months of time served, I think, something like that. So, I mean, if you're looking at 2 years and you've already got a year in with processing, like he's almost out, right? I mean, there's a possibility that this is next to nothing. There's even a possibility maybe that he gets no prison time, right?
I think that's a really slim possibility.
Right, but I'm saying,
very slim.
Right, but with some of these charges, there's mandatory minimums, right?
Right.
These aren't those charges. So there is an open possibility of little to no jail time. I would think they're going to give him something, but I think it's going to be, if you were going to guess, is it closer to no jail time or 10 years? Which one do you think it's going to be closer to?
5 years.
No, I'm saying, so you think it's right in the middle. Okay. Well, whatever. My point is, I don't think it's going to be close to 10 years. I could be completely wrong. I really don't think it's going to be close to 10 years. I think people are going to be upset about the amount of jail time and what the penalties are. When they heard this, they see 2 out of 5 guilty verdicts. They realize, okay, that's fine. He didn't get convicted on everything, but at least he got convicted on a couple. I really think people are going to be surprised with how little prison time P. Diddy is going to get out of all this. Do you think people are going to be surprised?
I think they'll be surprised only because some people have a very emotional connection. But logically, if he was convicted of these 2, he should not get any more or less prison time than anybody else convicted of these 2-Mann Acts that went to trial. So, his fame should not cause him to go to prison longer or shorter than anybody else.
Right. And that's really the point of how the system's supposed to work too, is if he's not supposed to get any bonuses for being famous, which, does he? Obviously, yes. He also shouldn't be punished more just because he's famous. And also with these types of charges, I'm not sure. I'm sure they're going to affect his brand. Obviously, these things have already been leaked out. He's been sued, all of that. But these kinds of charges really provide him an opportunity for a big time comeback after prison. Like we've seen this happen in the entertainment and sports industry, to where he could have been going to prison for the rest of his life. Like his life literally could have been over, or the rest of most of his natural life until he was, very old and potentially getting out. That's why this is looked at as such a humongous win by P. Diddy and his team. What is it like when you go in and you win on all of the major charges, but you still lose on something? Is the client usually happy? Do they usually understand? Are they still mad because they were convicted of something? What does that usually go like with the conversation with the client?
In a situation like this, the client is usually happy because you've explained to him the possible ramifications of being convicted of each of these counts. So they're usually pretty happy when they get convicted of only the minimums. And another thing, and I don't know if you, but part of that question was also talking about bail. Do you want to get into that?
Yeah, so they're going to have a bail hearing today at 1:00. Also, Brian Koberger's hearing is today at 1:00. We are going to end this stream by 1:00 so everybody can go watch the bail hearing if you want, the Koberger hearing. We will be doing more videos this week, probably later today on Koberger or tonight on Koberger. I'm going to do it. And then maybe, Dad, you and I can come back and talk about if he gets bail or doesn't get bail, why on the P. Diddy situation. But yeah, go ahead and talk about what are the factors that the court takes into place now, right? And we're going to talk about how it's different before the charges or during the charges versus now. What are you arguing as a defense attorney to try to get your client bail in this situation? Because people are thinking he's been convicted. He could be going to prison up to 20 years. Why would he get out now?
Well, here's a couple things. Number one, bail is almost a totally discretionary item with the judge. Courts hardly ever, and I think P. Diddy did appeal his prior no bail situation. So the judge can do pretty much anything they want with bail. Secondly, he's in a different position. He was presumed innocent on those first attempts to get bail. Now he's convicted. He's not presumed innocent anymore. However, he is innocent of the most serious charges that he didn't get bail for. So now the judge is looking at these two charges, which are the more minimal charges in his case. And I tell you, there was a telling, I don't know if you heard this, but the judge joked with P. Diddy at the hearing right after the verdict came in, which was just astounding to me. The judge said, Mr. Diddy, you don't want to go back to Brooklyn detention, do you? And Diddy goes, no. I mean, a conversation like that indicates to me that this judge, now seeing the verdict, is taking a different attitude toward P. Diddy. Normally, a person would not get bail after conviction by a jury in a federal case. Normally, they're remanded back to in this case, it'd be the Brooklyn Detention Center, which I've been to, and which is not a very nice place. So normally, a person would, go back there. In this case, it seemed to be that there was a signal here that this judge was going to give him a break because of the jury verdict and let him out for a while pending sentencing. So I think statistically, I would give the odds to him getting some kind of a pretrial pre-sentence release. Now, he might have an ankle monitor. His travel might be restricted.
Right.
He might have, there could be all sorts of conditions. But I think there's a really good chance that he's going to get some kind of pre-sentence release.
Yeah, and this is one where I'm really torn on, right? Because again, you have to separate the other facts that he was not in crimes that he was not convicted of, and if you take those out, and this was always just a Mann Act, a prosecution across state lines case, and you talk, is he a danger to reoffend when he's out? Is he a flight risk? Things like that. If he didn't flee when he knew charges were coming, and the charges had way more serious penalties that could have ended his life, that's actually an indication that he's not going to flee now, looking at a lot less jail time, potentially. So I actually think those flight risks have come down. He's willing to put up an exorbitant amount of money, maybe not to him, but to the rest of the world. And we know from, again, when he tried to get bail multiple times at the beginning of this case, that he is going to go above and beyond with the restrictions and whatever those conditions of the bail are going to be to make sure that he shows up and nothing bad happens. And once again, if I'm really the judge doing this legal analysis in my head, is he really going to risk being so stupid, committing another crime here before I give him this sentence? That would be incredibly stupid. And if he does, then we're just going to pile on at that point. So as much as I think it would pain me inside, the legal analysis, I can understand where you're coming from, where it might be understandable if he were to get bail. I do think people are going to think this is unfair. This is money and power and fame talking. And if he wasn't P. Diddy, he would never get this. But I'd be interested in knowing, like, just normal Mann Act convictions. If somebody's been sitting in jail for a year, would they get out pending sentencing if they were convicted of this? I don't know.
I can tell you that if he was just charged with these 2 Mann Acts initially, he wouldn't be in pretrial detention.
Right.
He'd be out on bond. I mean, nobody really goes to pretrial detention on Mann Act arrests. So he would have been out on bond. But on the other hand, you talk about his fame, but there's a lot of other bad stuff out there for the prosecution to show the judge about him. We had guns seized during the search warrants that had their serial numbers scratched off. We've got all the testimony the judge heard about violence and drugs and all sorts of stuff that were going on. So the prosecution, and that's what's going to happen at 1 o'clock, is going to paint a really major picture of someone who's a threat to society, who has a lot of money, who has the ability to flee, has some really big, beautiful boat somewhere that he can take off on. So they're going to be able to present a lot. But I got to tell you again, I wouldn't change my odds. I'd go with him getting out.
Yeah, it is. It's hard because he definitely has the means to, but you're right. There probably would have been some conditions that he could have put together if it was just the Mann Act charges, that he would have been out pending the trial. So if that's the case, then what would be the difference now? I mean, that's kind of after he's already served. I guess he doesn't have the presumption of innocence anymore. But yeah, it's an interesting legal analysis, especially when your brain doesn't want you to allow you to go there. Could jury members dig due to repercussions for future cases and spouses feeling trafficked? Our relationships is so hard to prove. I don't understand what this question means. You think if the government called KK, they might have gotten more guilty verdicts? I think the government fell short on who they called to testify. By the way, a big fan of you and Big George. I think if you go back and think about the things the prosecutors could have done differently, there's probably an array of things. I also heard there might have been a bunch of victims and then they only called 2. So I don't know what happened with that. We really be guessing at this point. It's hard to know.
I can't understand why there weren't any co-conspirators. I can't understand why some people didn't get deals in order to test. Excuse me. Excuse me. In order to testify. Where are these other people? I mean, there's got to be. I mean, they claim that he had an army of people that worked for him at Bad Boy. So I don't understand why they didn't have a bunch of those people testify.
Is it possible he just gets probation or something like time served? It's possible, but not likely. I haven't followed Diddy. Does he have other cases pending? He has other civil cases, but this was the only criminal case. And Leanne said, watch all the civil cases be dropped. I highly doubt that. Highly doubt that. I think he'll pay every one of them and try to move on with this. That's what I would guess would happen, but I don't know. I'm not involved in any of them. Do you think the temperature of this case would be different if it was televised? I think if Karen Reed wasn't televised, it would have been different. I agree. I don't know about this one. It's hard for me to say because I didn't get to watch it, right?
Well, but you know what? If you look at, again, strictly YouTube stuff, if you look at the YouTube stuff, Karen Reed, because it was televised and all, garnered a lot more YouTube action than the Diddy trial did.
Yeah, but they're saying, do you think it would have changed how it was tried in the courtroom?
Oh, I don't know about
be of any different. So if he hired workers locally instead of out of state, would they be fine? Weird. Well, we're talking about the federal charge, and they have to cross state lines for this Mann Act. Why didn't they throw? If it's in state, different statute of limitations, different things you have to prove. So it's a different charge. Why didn't they throw in everything but the kitchen sink? He had all those guns with serial numbers filed off. Where were the charges for that? I don't know.
I don't know either. I don't know either. I don't know why they couldn't prove maybe his direct connection to those guns in order to charge him with having illegal weapons. I don't know. Because
maybe they thought
filed off is illegal.
Maybe they thought simplifying it would be better. I don't know. That seems like strategy, but we don't really know. Why was he not charged with the gun defacement? The serial numbers, will that be a future charge? There's so many of the same things. The answer is just we don't know, right? We don't know. And again, I don't know enough about what the prosecutors did present here because I didn't get to see it every single day. So it's hard to answer these kind of fact specific questions, especially because I thought they were going to too. I thought the same as you all listening did. On the topic of wealth and legal defense, I think a solution lies in education of the public and transparency, attention through media. Thanks, Peter and Pops. I mean, I definitely think this helps. You know what your lawyer should be doing. You know what to look for in a lawyer. You know how the process should go. The more you can learn about your rights and the justice system that affects your life, the better you'll be. I mean, I definitely think that that's a pretty important part of this, as well as people being educated. Oh, it's good. Does this charge make someone an S offender? I don't think so.
I don't know, but I don't know.
I don't think so.
Maybe not. Yeah.
I don't think so, but I would have to look. That's a good question.
Yeah.
My initial reaction was I don't think so. Let me see what else we have here. I think that's pretty much most of the questions. I caught a lot of the similar questions that people had. So what are your thoughts as far as what's next with Diddy? Oh, there was one other overarching question a bunch of people asked. Does this mean he can never be charged with RICO again or trafficking again?
No, it only means he cannot be charged with RICO that are these facts.
And those
if
dates.
Another set of facts, he can be charged with RICO again, right?
Exactly. So that's how double jeopardy works. It's the similar facts and the facts also dates. So if he gets out tomorrow and on July 4th, he starts all over again, they can charge him again with the actions on July 4th going forward. Or like you just said, if they look back and there are different facts that constitute racketeering and conspiracy, then they can go back and again, try to charge him again. So yeah, but under these factual scenarios and these dates for these charges, it's over, one-shot deal, double jeopardy would apply, and he has been found not guilty. Any other parting thoughts that you have before we go?
No, again, it was a really great win. And frankly, you do as a prosecutor, you the bad guy, like you mentioned, they painted him as a pretty bad guy, but the defense was able to overcome it. They just didn't do a good enough job to get him to be convicted. But I mean, certainly that lifestyle they painted is not one anybody else in that courtroom, and certainly on the jury, had any concept of. Yeah,
I think they did a good job of saying being a bad guy doesn't make you a criminal, basically.
Right.
I'm disappointed with the results. I hoped justice would prevail, and I feel so defeated. Off topic, I messaged you on X. I'm 42 and finally received a jury summons yesterday. The judge only does felony criminal trials. It's going to be interesting, take all your knowledge and everything you learned here from watching these cases, go apply it to being the most fair, unbiased, impartial juror, listen to the evidence, make the decision based just on the facts and evidence before you at the trial. Jojo, I know they won't allow video in federal court, but did they release transcripts?
I think you can get the transcripts, yes.
It's not as easy as state court usually, but I don't know. I've never tried to order outside of our own cases, obviously.
Yeah, you can get the transcripts if you're willing to pay for them.
Yeah.
Which is a lot of money.
All right. That's all we got. Make sure everybody hits that like button before you go. I might be back later today to talk Kohberger, maybe tomorrow. We will see how it all plays out. We've got the Diddy hearing coming up, the Kohberger hearing coming up. Let me know in the chat which one or both if you will be watching. Hit the like button, subscribe. We will be back, Dad. Thanks for joining me as always. Till next time, we're out of here. Thanks for watching another episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you enjoyed the episode, please hit the thumbs up and share with your friends who may be interested here on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. And don't forget to check out the Lawyer You Know podcast with new seasons dropping every quarter. If you have a case you want to talk to us about, if it's a personal injury case, wrongful death, catastrophic injury, car accident, or slip and fall case, please email us at lawyeryouknow@gmail.com. And of course, all these links I just mentioned are included in the description below on this episode and every episode. So until next time, this is Peter Tragos, The Lawyer You Know.